What's up, everybody? Peter X, this Okafor here, and welcome to another episode of Team Building in the 21st Century. So this episode, I'm going to focus on Prince and, how he team built through his different bands as his goals and his music and what he wanted to do musically changed through his career. Now, this is coming on the heels of, in this series, this is the third episode. So did the Beatles, and really the Beatles, I talk about the importance of mentorship, and also of, the main, I said there were, obviously we have the Fab Four with the Beatles, but, then the fifth, sixth, and seventh Beatle in their roles. And five is, Brian Epstein, and six is George Martin, and they also serve as mentors. Little different focus here. So this is, sometimes I use, the business owner analogy. So this is, once you're up and running in the business, but, at some point, if you're successful, you scale up, or you want to do things differently. So, Prince's first band was the Revolution, and that band, starts in 1980, and goes all the way up to the early 90s. Maybe 89, 90, 91 is when, he switches over to the new power generation. And, he modeled the Revolution after Sly and the Family Stone. So he wanted it to be multiracial and a multi-gender band. That was important, coming out of Minneapolis. Minneapolis was in the 70s, as he was coming up in the 60s as a kid, was very, very segregated, and also very segregated musically. I mean, in the 70s, the black radio station went off the air at dark. His father was a jazz pianist, and was severely limited as when he played in his jazz bands as to where he could play in Minneapolis, because the segregation was in St. Paul, because the segregation was that strong there. So the one thing that immediately stands out to me when it comes to the Revolution and New Power Generation, or MPG, I'll use those two interchangeably, because that's what us Prince folks do. He had a lot of songwriters, who would go on to be songwriters in the Revolution and the time at the time. And MPG, these were, to be blunt about it, MPG, they were more jazz. They were better improvisational and musicians than in MPG. So Prince, had a shift, in what he wanted in his band, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But, contrary to popular belief, Prince was not always in the studio by himself. Matt Fink, the Revolution keyboardist, talks about sometimes, we'd be in the studio contributing and never got credit for a song, and then, a new album would come out and we get credit on a song that we did nothing on at all. So yeah, Prince, yes, that is not, I'm not undercutting his genius at all. He's, one of the, I say he's the best musician of all time, as he does so many things well, and songwriting's one of them, and he knew the studio better than probably any other musician of that time. He knew his way around the studio and did everything but the mastering. But he had some very good songwriters around him, and why not use them? I know for a fact that, he did, for Around the World in a Day, he did some rough takes and then handed over some of the songs to Wendy and Lisa, and they took them to Los Angeles and added stuff that, so Wendy and Lisa are, did some co-writing, and Around the World in a Day is credited to Prince and the Revolution. The Revolution got writing credits in that album. it's pretty well known I mean, it's been verified, multiple biographers. I mean, Prince wanted Party Up. Guess who wrote the song? Morris Day. And so Prince, I forget, what kind of check he offered Morris Day, or, I'll write you a check, or you can have your own band. And Morris wisely chose his own band. But yeah, so, I mean, that was, Party Up was Morris's, that was his jam. That was his song. So, I mean, let's look at, who was around him. I mean, Wendy and Lisa went on and, wrote, did their own music, did scores in Hollywood. I mean, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis by the time, Prince, known them at least since junior high school. They were all in the music class together. I mean, they just got in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for songwriting. Jesse Johnson did some great, his solo stuff was good and whatnot. And then, I mean, Andre Simone, he wrote for Jody Watley, her big hits in the 80s and into the early 90s. Adam Ant, Evelyn Champagne King, Jermaine Stewart. Jermaine had some big songs in the 80s. So, I mean, Andre Simone could write. Brown Mark did Stacey Lattice on Maserati. Troop, Lakeside, Chico DeBarge. So Prince had a lot of, songwriters early on. And why not? I mean, songwriting ain't easy. You have other songwriters around. They can provide an inspiration. And, his method of sometimes, again, you didn't get credit, but other times you got credit for stuff you didn't give. You didn't do anything for it. So Prince, it all evened out according to Matt Fink how that went. But, I mean, hey, if someone brings a good thing in there to the song, I mean, Prince wasn't stupid. He was going to use it. So, I mean, 1999 Purple Rain, Around the World in a Day, and Parade, credited for the writing by Prince and the Revolution. So what happened? Because again, MPG, the musicianship with MPG is far greater than the Revolution, but the songwriters aren't in MPG. I don't know if any of them have gone on to write songs for others. I mean, essentially Prince, post Revolution got, to be blunt about it, good jazz musicians, and they could make more money playing with Prince than they could, playing jazz. But most of these folks, Rhonda and, all, the bass player and Neto and all these folks, I mean, I'm sure they have a jazz background. Well, what happened? Well, one of the things that happened, and I remember listening to an episode of Eric Leeds, who was the sax player for Prince, and, he came in at the end of the Purple Rain tour and then played, certainly was part of MPG, but he came back in the 2000s. So he was in and out with Prince's band, but he talks about, post, particularly starting, in the late 80s, and the rehearsals for the concerts, and you'd be, 3 or 4 hours with literally, a couple bars. So literally 10 to 20 seconds of the song going over and over, because, if you hit a synth patch, that triggered lights, and the bass drum would trigger lights. And so everything was synchronized. And Prince, and the band, had to play a very tight show because of the lighting and all that was, literally synchronized to, computer-wise to the music. So everything was synced up, and, left, improvisation. There were parts of the show where improvisation was there, but I mean, it got kind of monotonous. And so this is where, in 87, this then, when the bootlegs drop in the early 90s, everybody freaks out. 1987, there was a bootleg called The Second Show That Night, and Prince played somewhere in Europe, and then after the show, he went to a little club and played. And what these second shows, these after shows were about, they were loose jams. They weren't synced up to anything. They could just get up there and jam. And, hey, they were I mean, Prince, he had the best of both worlds. I mean, he had a very, well-oiled machine, for the big money concerts, and he had and also a very well-oiled jam band / jazz band where he could get, he could improvise and have fun. And so, could the Revolution do that to an extent? Yes. They were a pretty good jazz band. I mean, if you go and you look at his birthday show, the 84 birthday show right before Purple Rain comes out, the 83 show, there's an 83 show out there where it's actually Wendy's first show, and it's he's doing a fundraiser for a children's nonprofit in Minneapolis. And so that's kind of the Revolution's version of a jam band, but it's a very different, it's not the same as MPG, in the late 80s and all the way through. I mean, they're just better musicians. And so, I mean, Prince needed that. He needed a different band. When people asked him, throughout the late 80s and early 90s, once the Revolution disbanded and they were like, what happened? He says, well, I outgrew the band. I mean, make no mistake about it, the Revolution's a great band. But they didn't serve Prince, Prince, needed a jam band, to a good jam band, and needed those jazz elements and those jazz musicians around him, to stay productive. And he didn't need the strong songwriting skills that the Revolution, the Time, and the folks of that group had. I mean, two different groups, two different skill sets. And then it's not about one's better than the other. It's about what Prince needed at the time. So so that was sort of that's the difference in the two bands, and the reason why Prince did what he did. And Prince's third band, with his reemergence, he did 2010, and then the only time, other than 83 where Prince didn't release an album, but, he didn't release anything until 2013, and, I mean, leave it to Prince to top off his career with an all-female band. I mean, Prince had, definitely, took a lot of women musicians in over the years and promoted them and nurtured them and really, tried to, make, so that they were successful. So, but I Third Eye Girl was I love them. I don't know. I mean, Prince, of course Prince, is the only, musician to ever front a band where a man is an all woman. He did it because no one else had done it. I mean, there's many bands out there, many in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that have an all male instrumentalist and the female singer. Prince flipped the script. It's who Prince is and it's what he does. And I love Three Eyed Girl, but it is important in who he is and in his his brand, because Prince was a strong advocate for women in the music business. So takeaways from Prince and team building. Well, as his needs changed, he got very different types of musicians in his bands so he could execute his strategies and what he was trying to do. So, I mean, early on with the Revolution, Prince is a great songwriter. He's a great songwriter early on, but he became a better songwriter, and some of it had to do with, Morris, could write songs. I mean, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because of their songwriting. Jesse Johnson was a very good songwriter. I mean, Andre Simone. I mean, I said this earlier. And then he needed to stretch out and needed, because of the type of live shows he was doing, in the big arenas, he needed, a group of musicians who could, who had the patience and the discipline to stick to, the regimented nature of the big arena shows, but, had the flexibility, to really, let loose and rock out at the after shows and really stretch out and do. I mean, for the live shows, the MPG band members were just better suited for what Prince wanted to do, with the after shows than the Revolution. The other takeaway for me is, I mean, we're in this very heated political time. And but Prince, I mean, was one of the first big DEI folks. I mean, the multiracial and multigender of not just the Revolution, but all of his bands. And ultimately, Three Eye Girl is, four female musicians backing, Prince. And not only that, I mean, Donna, who the guitarist, was clearly a lead guitarist. I mean, Prince. I mean, Wendy and Des Dickerson were rhythm guitarists. Prince never paired up with another lead guitarist until Donna. And so there were times, Prince played a lot of rhythm anyway, but if you look at Prince live, he always made sure, if he took a solo, Donna got a solo too. And, Prince oftentimes, he and the rhythm guitarist would be playing rhythm. I mean, he's much more, I mean, he's known as a shredder, but he was a great, great rhythm guitarist. He's probably, it's probably top 5, top 10 easily as a rhythm guitarist. And I think he's a top 5, lead guitarist as well. Particularly, post, passing and all of his live stuff on YouTube. But he's, going back to the whole DEI thing, I mean, I keep coming back to the song Uptown and that anthem off of Dirty Mind, and how, for a good portion of his career, to the very late 90s to early 2000s, Prince really was DI, and I didn't find this out for years, but Wendy and Lisa were, are gay and were in a relationship, and so Prince was okay with that at the time. Now, unfortunately, when Prince gets back with the Jehovah's Witnesses, he does that, his views on the LGBTQ community change. He did make a statement and very clearly anti-LGBTQ sometime in the early 2000s and retracted it. But I mean, that's where Prince was at the time. The interesting thing is, Prince is seen as a champion of the LGBTQ because, I mean, he wore high heels and, makeup and sometimes had, a woman's hairstyle and all that other stuff. So the optics and Prince's brand as androgynous, overwhelmed his conservative turn, when it came to LGBTQ issues. I mean, the brand that he built in the early 80s was stronger even than, the philosophical change they had later in life. So it's interesting, but I have to honestly put that out there, that there was a change for Prince. And so, going back to the whole DEI thing, I mean, yes, we're in a, post, 2020 and George Floyd, I mean, a lot of corporations, got very aggressive with their DEI and, Trump and the backlash, and now they're pulling back on the DEI. But DEI is here to stay, diversity, equity, and inclusion's here to stay because, look, I mean, 50% of Americans, and are either people of color or of mixed race. So, that's the future workforce. And if you can't, have a workforce where they're comfortable and they feel wanted, they're not going to work for you, and you're not going to be a successful business. So even though there is some retrenchment, and there's, the MAGA folks are there is a backlash to DEI. It ain't going anywhere. The demographics are gonna, it's coming back, and sooner rather than later. I mean, because it's going to be a necessity. You can't. I mean, Gen Z ain't working for, an employer where they're not respected. I mean, everybody says that. There's a lot of criticisms of Gen Z. I love Gen Z, about what they're about. And they ain't, you better have a friendly work environment or they're bouncing. So DEI is here to stay. It ain't going anywhere. It might, there might be a little receding of it, but, and Prince, embodies that. I mean, when I think of team building overall with Prince, again, I think of adaptability, and I think of, the song Uptown. That was that was his first real anthem. And even though, Party Up was anti-war, was a little, but that was that was the first clarion call, and everybody's like, yeah, Uptown. So yeah, so those are my takeaways on Prince. When you're excluding people in your team, you're hurting your team. You're hurting the purpose of your team. If you're a business owner, you're hurting your business because, there's skill sets there. I mean, first of all, 1 in 3 people in this country now are people of color, and by 2050, half of the population is going to be people of color. You need folks who can, you need people in the room, in your group, and your business that can, communicate with these different groups and make them feel, wanted, so that they will become customers. I mean, there's a lot of choice, yes, there's a lot of monopolies, but there's always choices. And yeah, there's monopolies, but there's always, we're in the era now of AI and advanced, 3D printers. There's always choices out there. Fiverr and getting, in the gig economy and getting, finding folks who, hey, yeah, there are huge, big monopolies, but there are choices out there, and people will find them if you're not, if they don't feel comfortable with your organization, and they don't feel respected and wanted by your organization. So yeah, that's this episode. Working on one more for this team building line, and then we'll see what happens. So yeah, what I need, particularly on this, since I'm kind of riffing and making, building something new here, leave some comments. And so then, maybe out of these comments, I can get some more ideas and some more episodes. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Yeah, I got 5 albums of my own. They're connected here on YouTube to my channel. I'm also on all the streaming services. I also have 2 science fiction fantasy novels and a novella on Amazon. So my music is under the name Exodus, Xodus, and my fiction on Amazon is under the name Peter Exodus Okoffer, or Peter Okoffer. So thank you for coming through. Appreciate your support, and I will see you next episode.